Hi everybody, my name is Savannah Barth and I'm a cadet working on my Silver Award project for Girl Scouts. My project is over neurodiversity and the difference in how people think, and the reason that I chose this project is because I am constantly seeing a lack of knowledge amongst my own generation and older ones, so I'm trying to spread awareness so that we can identify the obstacles amongst our peers and help each other become better and create a better world. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the different types of mental disabilities. So one of the most important mental disabilities that I think is important to fully understand because it is so common and it is, most people know about it, but they don't fully understand it. So that is one of the first things I want to talk about is autism. So you might not always see autism. It could take a while for you to figure it out. If you see on this scale right here, you'll see that one end of the scale, I haven't written anything on it, but one end of the scale, the one on the left side would be people who are nonverbal, who have autism, and then the other side of the scale, the right side, would be people who are highly intelligent, but they kind of lack in social skills, and that is one of the, I don't want to say side effects, but that is one of the aspects of autism, is it affects your ability to communicate with other people. So another mental disability would be ADHD. Some of you may have heard of it. It usually goes hand in hand with things like dyslexia, which is very common amongst children. ADHD is one of the most common learning disorders and mental disabilities amongst children. It is something that disallows you to focus. It causes you to fidget or not keep still. It dramatically affects your work or school life, and it can cause problems in some of your relationships just because of that, lack of focus or ability to keep still. Many children with ADHD are considered disruptions to their classroom. In reality, they just learn different, which is why some of them go through a changed curriculum. So people with ADHD cannot sit still for a long period of time or process long lists. So usually you have to break it apart differently because we all learn differently, and that's why I'm working on this project. So going back to autism for just a second, this was an experiment that was done a couple of years ago. It was between a child who had autism and a child who didn't. Most of you know what Where's Waldo is, but the research project basically said that a child with autism found it easier to complete the Where's Waldo game than to tell the difference between two similar-looking people, like Jessica Chastain and Bryce Dallas Howard, I believe is her name. But the child who didn't have autism found it easier to tell the difference between two people, and so that just kind of shows the difference, and I thought that was cool. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is a learning disability known as dyslexia. It is one of the most common and most known mental disabilities. It affects a person's ability to process language, and it makes pronunciation, focus, and ability to have a large vocabulary difficult. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can't do it. They obviously can. But it is harder for them. My brother has it, and I know that he struggles, and he has a changed curriculum in school to kind of help him with that as he kind of moves along with reading and writing a little bit slower than others. So people with dyslexia, they often have trouble focusing on words and reading, and dyslexia kind of causes the words to move off the page. As my brother described it, they were kind of moving in like a tornado, which can be really draining to the person reading, and so they really don't enjoy it as much. But I do know people who love to read and they have dyslexia, so it really just depends on the person. So they have difficulties with spelling, and as I said before, they often go through a changed curriculum in school. The other one that I was going to talk about is dyscalculia. It's not math dyslexia. That is what I called it the first time. It's basically what it is, but I guess I'm not supposed to call it that. But it is a learning disability that affects a person's ability to process math-related problems. They sometimes lack in the areas to do calculations mentally because a large part of their brain that stores short-term memory is not as strong as others, so they struggle with those calculations a little bit. So I don't have a slide for this next one, so here's a picture of Kat. But one of the other things I wanted to talk about was the programs that you can do in your middle schools and elementary schools, especially middle schools, less so the elementary schools. But there are things where you can sign up to be more exposed to neurodiversity, kind of all these mental disabilities. There's things like Partners PE, where you can go and you can work with the kids who have things like autism. And then there are different programs where you can sign up to be friends with kids who are a part of those special needs programs. So that is definitely something that you should be interested in doing or having your kids do, because the more exposed they get to it, the less judgmental they'll be in their life, and they'll understand it more. It's very beneficial, and I think that everybody should do it. So moving on from the cat slide, I'm going to start talking about things to be aware of when you're kind of discussing neurodiversity. So obviously neurodiversity is a mental aspect, but these mental disabilities can also affect people physically. So here's a couple of things that I learned about the physical aspects. So younger people with autism, they may have issues with sleeping or performing basic motor skills, sleeping, walking, sitting, and have balance issues. People with ADHD, a lot of the times they have sleep disorders just because they can't shut that brain off. ADHD can cause a higher rate of obesity, heart issues, breathing problems, or respiratory problems. Dyslexia can cause hand-eye coordination problems and speech impairments, obviously because they struggle with that more. And migraines. And dyscalculia, it does have a large effect on a person's ability to assume the distance between objects. So I already kind of went into depth on how autism can affect a person socially, but obviously these other mental disabilities do have an effect on people socially. So autism, again, can have an effect on a person's ability to understand and recognize other people's feelings and express their own. Being in a crowded and stressful place can cause them more stress than others. They get overstimulated very, very quickly, especially with the sensory issues that autism can bring. Down syndrome, I will talk about a little bit later and go into depth on that. But ADHD can cause hyperactivity in all aspects, including social events. So what those events would kind of look like is somebody with ADHD would often interrupt and have trouble picking up on social cues, which a lot of times can cause others to feel really unimportant and ignored in relationships. That's why it's so difficult to keep them sometimes with somebody who has ADHD or as somebody with ADHD. It can be really difficult to manage emotions and keep focused on related conversations. And then dyslexia, because of a difficulty with language processing, a lot of the times they become uncomfortable and stressed in social settings just because they struggle with that word fluency. So dyscalculia, because these people, they struggle so much in an area that affects their daily life, it can cause a lot of self-doubt and making and keeping relationships and willingly putting themselves in social situations is a really large struggle with these people with dyscalculia because there might not be as much self-confidence. So like I said before, I was going to get back to Down syndrome. So here it is. So as you can see in these pictures, there are 3 guys and 2 of them have Down syndrome. If you can guess which ones, that would be great. It is the top 2. If you look at their facial structure, you can definitely see a difference from the guy at the bottom. They have almond-shaped upturned eyes, and their jawline is a little bit less structured than the guy at the bottom. So ways that Down syndrome can affect a person socially is people with Down syndrome, they may have a slower development in language and speech, sometimes similar to that of a person with dyslexia, but not entirely the same. They typically have good social skills. They sometimes struggle understanding and managing emotions and communicating early in their lives. So what these are some percentages of mental disabilities in the United States. So less than 1% of the people in the United States have Down syndrome, 15% have dyslexia, and 4% have dyscalculia. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.